Welcome back to React Native Radio Podcast. Brought to you by the Green M&M Council, who reminds you, green M&M's lascivious nature is purely a rumor. Episode 245, Shopify's FlashList library.
So, have you guys ever had to use Patch Package?
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
I love Patch Package.
Yeah, super useful.
It saved my butt several times.
Yeah, so for the listeners, if you don't know what Patch Package is, it's a really cool library that lets you make a change in an NPM package and apply it to your project every time you run Yarn. It's really useful if there's a change you want to make, but like the pull request isn't merged yet, or you're just like waiting on a publish, or you want to try it out in your anyway. It's really useful. However, last week I had to patch Package.
You had to patch,
which is a thing.
The NPM package.
I had to patch Package.
What went wrong?
Yeah, really.
So I had to increase the buffer size because it was like timing out, and it would just like error out when I was trying to patch another library.
Yo, dog.
Patch Package wasn't working, and so I googled the error, and there was a pull request which had gotten merged, which increased the buffer size, but then there were more comments that said, "Oh, this is still broken for me." I had to increase the buffer size again to a higher amount, and so I did that.
So I don't understand how that works. Like, obviously so when you yarn, it brings down Patch Package, and then it applies patches to all of the downloaded packages.
Yes.
So it would apply it to itself.
Version specific.
But then how does it know to use that new one to patch the rest of them?
Because then it's already patched. So when you run yarn patch package, oh my God.
Wait, you can run that separately.
Patch package. So you run patch package, and it patches patch package.
And then you manually run it again.
And then you run it to patch the actual package that you're trying to patch.
We should have started a drinking game every time you said Patch Package. We would be done. We wouldn't get to our
This sounds a little bit like my pool. I've had to patch a few holes in my pool, but right now one of my patches is leaking.
Has a hole in it, so you had to patch your patch.
I haven't patched that one yet, but
so,
this is the downside to leave it to me to swerve this into a discussion about my pool.
About your pool. Or your tractor. I'm surprised the tractor.
I do have a story about my tractor, but I'm not going to tell it this time. Maybe next time. I have a weird bug with my tractor. Okay. Anyway, so I'm Jamin Holmgren, your host and friendly CTO of Infinite Red. I am located in the Pacific Northwest with my wife and 4 kids on 3 acres with a cat and a tractor. And I am joined today by my good co-hosts, Robin and Mazen.
Ooh.
Okay, that's just ridiculous.
Are we just good?
We haven't used it. It just sounds super underwhelming. Yeah, they're good.
We're good.
We're
not
fine.
Great.
They're all right.
Just okay.
It works. And we have a special guest, Talha Naqvi, who I will introduce in just a second. Robin Heinz is a senior software engineer here at Infinite Red, located kind of southwest of me in Portland, Oregon, with her husband and 2 kids, and has specialized in React Native for the past 5 years. Mazen Chami lives in Durham, North Carolina with his wife and baby boy. I think that used to say newborn, but someone edited the template now because he's growing. He's getting bigger super fast. So he's a former pro soccer player and coach, and is a senior React Native engineer also here at Infinite Red. And then our guest today, very excited about this, Talha Naqvi, is a software development manager at Shopify. He's the creator of Recycler List View, which we are going to talk about. That's not what the episode is directly about, but it's a very integral part of it. And he lives in Vancouver, BC, and has worked at Shopify for, is it almost a year now?
Yeah.
Wow, yeah, that's awesome. So I'm gonna bring you in a bit here, Talha, but I want to really quickly mention that this episode is sponsored by Infinite Red. Infinite Red is a premier React Native design and development agency located fully remote in the US and Canada. We do have someone over in Vancouver, by the way, over in your neck of the woods. If you're looking for React Native expertise for your next project, hit us up. You can learn more on our website, infinite.red/React Native. Don't forget to mention that you heard about us through the React Native Radio podcast. All right, let's get into our topic because I really want to reserve as much time as possible for the topic. I know a lot of people are really interested in this. We're going to be talking about Shopify's FlashList. But first, Talha, can you tell us about yourself and how you ended up at Shopify and what your role also has been with FlashList itself?
Yeah, sure. So I started out my career as a developer working on Windows, and then I, started to develop some Windows Phone apps. Eventually, I started working on Android, tried a little bit of web, and my React Native journey really started with. So I was in India before I moved to Canada. In India, one of the major problems that all mobile developers and companies in general face is people don't really update apps. So what got us interested in React Native was actually not cross-platform stuff, but being able to ship over the air. And that's how we got into it. And I remember I started playing with it back in 2016. So it's been quite a while. And, formed a small team, eventually took the leadership of that team, became a manager, and spent quite a bit of time there. And then I was looking at, what else I can do, what other organizations I can explore. And then Shopify came up with this very interesting announcement, right? That they're going all in. And it was kind of a no-brainer because I knew that, I could just go and apply my skill set and contribute and get a different experience. So that's how I joined Shopify. So I joined as a development manager on the retail team. And there was this opportunity that presented itself where, the foundations, the RN foundations team was going to build, they wanted to solve the list view problem. And they pitched it to me and asked that, do you want to help because of my prior experience working on recycler list view? So I took up the role of, so Shopify has this concept of champions, right? Which in a simple way, they are the ones who lead a project and they're the ones who are responsible for making it happen. So I was champion for this project called FlashList, but really there was a phenomenal team working with me to make it happen.
I do remember that announcement about Shopify going all in on React Native. And I think that's kind of, it's a shout out to the rest of your companies to be public about being, public about being all in on React Native because you can attract amazing talent to your team.
Well, it's only going to help you ultimately. I mean, the more companies do that, A, you're going to attract talented people, and B, the more companies do that, the more credibility React Native has, and the stronger its reputation will be, and the more support it'll get. So
it's funny how you said you went into React Native not because of cross-platform. I feel like that's the first time I've heard that. Most people are like, cross-platform is one of the big reasons we're going to try it out and we're going to go from there. But most people do forget that, with native, as far as I know, can you do over the air on native?
No.
Not that I know of. Exactly. So your ability to do that on...
The JavaScript bundle is what lets you do that.
Exactly. So that's a big plus. And like you mentioned, like people not updating the app. My wife might not like me to say this on the podcast, but she doesn't update unless I get my hand on her phone and update her apps and her OS. So
yeah,
I feel your pain, and that's a really cool like intro into why you got into React Native.
Yeah, that's amazing.
How big is the team specifically working on FlashList? I know Shopify's React Native team is pretty big, but
yeah. So of course there are so many teams working with React Native, right? But the foundations team are specifically people working on this project, right? So we were 4 in total. Like, huge shout out to them, David Cortez, Merrick Ford, Elvira Barchik. So 4 of us were working on FlashList to make it happen. So it was pretty interesting because they were located in Europe and I was in Vancouver. So we had an interesting working relationship where I would just have like a 2 or 3 overlap with them. And most of the stuff we did asynchronously. So I also experienced, how to be effective in remote work in this whole journey.
What was the inspiration for FlatList? I mean, I do get...
We're going to do that How many times are we going to do that?
Right. Trust me, I'm happy there's something other than FlatList, but the name's too close. All right. What's the inspiration for FlashList?
See, the idea again was to bridge the gap between, how native lists perform and how you experience lists in React Native. two problems, right? One is when you scroll quickly, of course, you get this bunch of blank space, and you can get it pretty easily, right? If your list is complex enough. For a simple list, maybe not that easy, but for a complex one, it's something that happens. And the other motivation was being very responsive. Like having the UI be extremely reactive to user inputs. That's not the case with FlatList today. What I mean by is, imagine you have a checkbox, right? And you have a flat list. You tap on that checkbox. You're going to update your data. All the components will get updated. And your checkbox, there's a bit of lag in actually updating it. Solving problems like these. So, like overall, it was about having a very fast and responsive list, which kind of solves all of your use cases. Like you shouldn't have to really worry about implementing complex lists in your app anymore.
Yeah, I remember working on a project. I don't know, Robin, if you were still on that project too at the time, but we were literally fighting with the flat list on-end reach threshold for several days, I think it was. And it was just one of those things where we spent a lot of time just trying to understand that value and then fight with it to give us the data before the user even gets there. And then when the user was scrolling fast, like you mentioned, there was just a lot of blank space. And that was just really, really hard to work with. So how does it work? Like what happens underneath the hood?
What's the magic?
Yeah, what's this magic we're all hearing about?
Yeah, before I get into that, right? Like you said, a lot of teams at Shopify were also going through the same. And the process of building this whole thing was, again, we talked to all the teams, figured out what the problems are, and then find a solution for it. But ultimately, right, what makes FlashList faster is recycling, right? So the way FlatList works, right, is whenever your view goes out of your viewport, it's marked as something that's not really getting used. So what it can do is it can simply destroy it, right? And that saves memory. And so you get this virtualization where you are not going to run out of memory. So that problem is pretty well solved. But when you try to go back to that view, right, it will recreate it. And what happens during recreation is, first of all, your entire view on the native layer needs to be recreated. The entire layout needs to happen. And React Native also has to issue an instruction to create a view, which is typically a much bigger instruction compared to an update instruction, which would just say, okay, maybe just change this text. But for creating an entire thing, it has to issue a huge command over the bridge. So that makes creation of view a lot more expensive compared to just updating it. So what FlashList does instead is, when your view goes out of the viewport, it's not going to destroy it. It's going to keep it as it is. But let's say you scroll down and you have to render a new view. Then it takes that old view, it applies a transform to it, moves it down, and just updates it with new data. So no new views are created on the UI side, right? On the native layer. Most of the layout can also get preserved if the OS has that optimization. In addition to this, even your JavaScript objects are recycled, right? Because the JavaScript component that React generates, that is also preserved.
This reminds me of this, and I don't even necessarily remember exactly. I remember when I was a kid, there's this story that I read about a cowboy, and he was selling some cows to another, like a rancher or something like that, but he didn't have enough cows. You know, he was supposed to bring maybe 100 cows, but he only had like 20. So he put the rancher on a hill and he just marched the cows in a circle around the hill and told them to count them until there were 100. And it was the same 20 cows just going around and around and around in a circle, getting counted 5 times each. So that's basically what you're doing here. You're basically just taking the same 5 or maybe 10 rows and just marching them over and over and over and just repainting them a little bit every time they go by. It's all smoke and mirrors. It's not actually an endless list, but it looks like an endless list. You can't tell the difference between that and an endless list, but that's essentially what you're doing with this recycling. Yeah.
If you look at recycling is a lot quicker than actually destroying and recreating. So one of the other things that we could do is reduce our render buffer. For those of you who are familiar with FlatList would know that it has a prop called window size, and its default value is 10, which means 10 screen worth of content is pre-rendered, right?
That's a lot.
Yeah, it is a lot.
It's a lot, right? It's a lot. Like you can see that FPS counter dropping in the beginning. Believe it or not, with FlashList, it's just 250 pixels.
Wow.
Whoa.
Yeah,
That's not
so
even a full screen on some
No.
devices.
that's not even a full screen on most devices. So you're going to create a very small number of
That's amazing.
items.
Well, because creating takes so long, you need like 10 screens worth of content to get you
Yeah.
into the future. That's wild.
Now, this is not a new concept. I remember when I started doing iOS development, 10 years ago, the built-in table view controller for iOS would do recycling. And it was a weird concept to learn. Like, okay, you put it into the queue and then you dequeue something, one of the cells, and then you repaint it and you adjust things. And you have to it'll give you an index so you can kind of like pull out of your data. But you had to do it really manually. I assume this is kind of based on that and kind of based on that concept.
Yes, exactly. And that's what we set out to achieve. Like being able to recycle is going to lead to improvements in your memory consumption and reduce the CPU overhead. And it did, and it worked out pretty well. And the other benefit that I was talking about, right, like small render window, that impacts your app's responsiveness a lot. Like if you guys have a chance, just go and try it. Like with a checkbox, right, you'd see checkbox is getting updated almost instantly. While with FlatList, it's going to take some time, especially if you have that full 10 screen size worth of content rendered.
You mentioned that it uses a transform mechanism to basically move the recycled view where it needs to be. Is that brittle at all? I mean, how precisely do you need to know like the height of your content or things like that? Like, how brittle is it?
We only really need you to provide just one estimate. So you don't like no developer has to really just estimate everything or compute the height of any of the views. Let's say if you have 10 different types of views with 10 different heights, you can just provide an average. And we have made it simple. Like you can simply render FlashList without an estimate, and it's going to give you a suggestion. You can just take that suggestion and put it there.
Okay.
And it's going to work pretty well. And after that, it just takes care of everything. Like you don't have to do anything else.
Yeah.
Even if items vary quite a bit in size, we have enough tolerance in the component that it's going to take care of it. And this was like, that's a good point, because like this is one of the things that we discussed a lot internally, that how do we want to get this estimate? Like it was a mandatory prop in the beginning, but we were not happy with it because it was difficult to compute. You had to do an average yourself. And that's where we came up with this idea of, just compute it and suggest it as a warning that, add this to improve.
That's a really good user experience.
All this is making me think, whenever I'm using like a longer flat list, one of my biggest pain points is pagination.
Mm-hmm.
How does FlashList do anything specific to handle pagination? I mean, because you mentioned the 200 pixels. That's very small, and we're talking about potentially like 3 or 4 scrolls. I don't know. Most APIs will return either 50 or 100 items, and then you get the next 50 or 100. So is there anything happening to handle this, or is it just because of the recycler view all as well?
It depends, right? What kind of challenges you are facing. Like we haven't done anything special for on and reach, to be honest, right? I can make a guess what your problem could have been, right? When you're at the end of the list and you do a pagination, again, it will try to fill up its entire buffer, right? Of 10 screen, right? So that might lead to a lot of performance hit, because that's a lot to draw, right? But with FlashList, right, you'd almost always just draw those 250 pixels. Like you can choose to increase that in specific cases, but the default number is 250. And it works well in most cases. So no matter how many items you add in your list, right, there's no correlation between number of items and how FlashList is going to work.
Mm-hmm.
That's good to know.
Yeah.
So speaking of recycling, you created Recycler List View. And that was, I think, was that pre-Shopify that you created that? Yeah.
Yes.
So tell me about that one, because that's some of the underpinnings of FlashList. FlashList does stuff on top of it. Where does well, first off, how'd you come up with and what were you using Recycler List View for? And then secondly, how does FlashList sort of build on that?
So while I was working for Flipkart back in India, so we had the same problem that Shopify had about lists, and we solved it with Recycler List View. But Recycler List View, we worked with a set of constraints or assumptions there. Like one was it has to be JS only because of how Flipkart operated, and shipping over the air was also important for bug fixes and some of the important releases. So being JS only was important. We couldn't keep changing native code, but the recycling aspect of Recycler List View worked very well, especially if you didn't have dynamic heights, right? Like working with dynamic heights in Recycler List View is pretty hard because you need to estimate each and everything, and you have to be quite accurate in those estimates, which is where most of the developer pain points used to come from. So while working on FlashList, we had to implement recycling. So we considered multiple aspects. First idea was to add recycling to FlatList, right? Maybe extend from it, modify, and try and add recycling there. But then we realized that if we were to add recycling, then a lot of other functionality that FlatList derives from scroll view is going to break. For example, sticky headers, stuff like that, right? That depends upon you having each of your item rendered as an individual cell. So a lot of things were going to break. The second natural option was, of course, to depend upon Recycler List View to do the same thing. And it comes with a lot of features that we wanted to build with. And of course, I was super familiar with it. So we built a small sample, and it was with a fixed height, but it worked out pretty well. So everybody was on board. But the major challenges with the Recycler List View had to be solved, like, for example, layout being on JavaScript, and you get tons of glitches with it if you have dynamic heights. And what we did is we added a layout algorithm on the native side. We call it auto layout view. What it does is it can accept anything that resembles a grid layout, and it can correct it before it's painted on your screen. So Recycler List View can generate whatever it wants, but when you see it, it's going to be correct. And that helps with almost everything. Like your blank area is reduced because if you imagine if your estimate is too large or too less, you can get blank spaces. But given this algorithm is preemptively just correcting everything, like it kind of eliminates that problem no matter what size of elements you have. And then a lot of people don't know how to tweak Recycler List View. It has like so much stuff in it. So we did that for everyone as part of FlashList. Like we don't even use Recycler List View directly. We use a derivative called Progressive List View. Okay. Yeah, which makes sure that your load times are super fast. It's going to measure how big is your screen, then figure out how many elements to mount, and then only draw what fills your first screen, and then automatically batch the rest of the draw for your second frame. And then in the next frame, it's going to build your recycler pool automatically. So when you actually start scrolling on FlashList, you're actually drawing nothing new. It's all getting reused. While if you implement Recycler List View today, you'd most likely have a few frame drops when you just start to scroll, because it's going to start building items to fill its recycle pool, which FlashList doesn't have to do. It just does it in the beginning.
You're measuring things in terms of actual like frame by frame, like a video game would do, where you're trying to fit everything into a frame.
Yeah. So our goal was to just make sure that, how should I put it? Like, you shouldn't be able to make performance related mistakes easily. There are certain things that are difficult to control in that area, but for the most part, right, if you use FlashList, you'll have a pretty well-performing list quite easily.
So FlashList seems pretty awesome, and it's amazing how quickly it's been adopted across the whole ecosystem.
Almost all of our clients are at least talking about their plans to implement it.
Yeah.
Or they already have.
Just this morning, I was working with one of the other devs, Frank, at IR, and we were implementing FlashList in Ignite.
Yeah, our boilerplate. We made that decision even though we normally won't include something that's this early, in its, we sort of want to try it in a couple projects and see how it goes. But it sure seems to be rapidly, I guess, a testament to your team's like high quality work, really.
Oh yeah. Well, it comes from Shopify. Like you trust it. Like there's a certain amount of reputation there.
I would agree with that. So I guess the question that comes out of that is, well, it's a kind of a multi-part here. First off, would there be any plans to integrate this into the React Native core as FlashList? Or could the original FlatList be modified to use some of these techniques to be faster itself?
We haven't specifically had any discussions with Meta around this or anyone in the community. But again, I have a viewpoint, right? Like when you're a separate package, you can move a lot faster. But imagine, right, like if you have to wait for a React Native upgrade to get a fix in FlashList, right? I strongly believe in modularizing stuff, and I believe that having it outside might actually be better.
Well, actually, if I can interrupt here, it might actually make sense to just get rid of FlatList out of the core.
The lean core
initiative.
Yeah, they're removing so many packages already, and
pulling stuff out.
Just put it in the community repo, and people can choose to use it over FlashList.
There's an argument to be made that maybe React Native should come with some sort of a list, some sort of a thing that you can display a list with, because that's such a basic concept, and bringing in a third party just to show that maybe is going a little far. But I don't know. It makes sense what you're saying.
I can see Meta at least wanting, to support it officially, mention it in the docs. Given how widespread the adoption is at this point, I'd be surprised if Meta doesn't get involved in some way.
Yeah, that'll definitely be cool. I think lists are a problem. Like it's a quite an outspread problem, right? Like,
oh yeah, every app in the universe has a list in it somewhere.
yeah, it's pretty widespread, and everybody has been through this. And I think that's why the adoption is looking pretty good, because most of the people have lists. Most of the mobile applications are lists, right? Like, honestly speaking, right?
That's like 90% of what we do is fetch data, put it in a list.
Well, and credit to you, Talha, and your team, like keeping it compatible with the API was a huge decision, because you could have gone with maybe a different API. There are other options out there, but you just said, nope, FlatList API is close enough. Let's do basically that. And so people can rename their FlatList to FlashList, tripping up Mazen every time. And then maybe a few gotchas, but otherwise, like, it's just a drop-in replacement, which is really, really good for adoption.
That's huge. Yeah.
Yeah. And that was the idea when we were discussing what API we're going to keep. Like having just same API as FlatList, you can make it a drop-in replacement, like you mentioned, but you don't really even have to educate anyone, right? Let's say if you had already worked with React Native, you're familiar with that FlatList API, and you can just start working on FlashList, right? In a way, your official documentation also teaches you FlashList. So I was pretty excited by that idea. And it's a good API, to be honest, right?
It is.
It's a good API.
I like FlatList's API.
It's much better than ListView's API.
Yeah.
Those are dark days.
God, ListView. Coming back to this point, right? Like having the API same, it enables a lot of interesting use cases. For example, right, like we do differ from FlatList in some areas. For example, if you specify sticky header indices and you have 0 in there, FlashList is actually going to stick your first item, while FlatList is going to stick your header. So we made a couple of choices like these because we felt that this behavior is too implicit, right? Like if I have sticky headers calculated and I just add a header to my list, now I have to offset all these sticky indices by 1. That was weird. And then there are some use cases which don't work in FlashList right now. For example, if you have a very small list, right? 2-3 items, and you want to reuse that component inside another scroll view, right? The idea is that your same component can become an infinite list, but can also be embedded in other lists. So FlashList cannot do that right now. We do not support FlexGrow. But if you have the API just like FlatList, right, you can simply implement an if statement in your code that if it's being embedded, continue to use FlatList because you don't care about performance if there are 2-3 items. But if it's not embedded, just use FlashList.
You can like have like const my list equals and then like a ternary and return either FlashList or FlatList. And then when you say my list, just use either one interchangeably.
Yeah, and that's how we have implemented in a couple of our apps, right? Like, because we usually release things under a feature flag first, test it out, and that feature flag does exactly that. If on, use FlashList. If off, just go to FlatList.
Do you guys have any plans to integrate with the new architecture? Or is it already compatible with the new architecture?
Okay, so it's not going to work with new architecture right now, but huge shout out to Software Mention. They are helping us in actually getting that done. And they have already raised the first PR.
Nice.
So it's going to be compatible with the new architecture pretty soon. There are some issues that we are seeing on Android that we want to investigate and make sure that there are no performance issues, right? Like, ideally, we want it to work faster on the new architecture because the bridge overhead is supposed to go down with Fabric, right? So theoretically, it should make FlashList a lot faster without us specifically using any synchronous APIs or anything like that. But we just have to make sure that happens and we vet it quite well before we push it out.
So we've talked a lot about what makes FlashList awesome, and we all think it's awesome. We're all using it. But I want to know what sucks about it. It's a blunt question, but it basically means just what needs to be improved. Why might you not use FlashList and stick with FlatList?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there are a couple of things that suck because of recycling itself. I'll give you an example. Most of the people, when they implement FlatList, they would assign an explicit key, right? And that's what React recommends, that you add a stable key to your items, which is dependent on data and not on indices or anything like that. But if you add that key by mistake to FlashList, right, all your recycling benefits just disappear. So that's one thing that's very easy to miss, and it has been a little difficult to educate people about it. Like, community has picked it up very well, but that's the easiest thing that you can screw up and lose your gains.
Well, it's been beat into our heads. Put a key on any repeating item, like put a key on it. And then Talha comes in and says, yeah, stop putting keys on stuff. Like, we got this handled.
Exactly. In fact, we even recommend people, if you're rendering let's say a complex component inside FlashList and you have a list inside, or you're rendering a scroll view by, doing an array.map, we suggest that you explicitly ignore lint and put indices there as well.
Oh, wow.
Because if you do that, right, for example, let's say you have 5 products with product IDs that you're rendering as a list within your component. When it's being recycled, product IDs for all of them are going to change, and these items are going to get recreated. While if you would have used indices or something that does not change, FlashList would have been able to just recycle them too. So the idea is, it's a little, like, recycling is a little bit difficult to understand, and you have, like, to get maximum gains, you have to get familiar with that idea. Another example of that would be, people use a lot of conditionals inside React component, right? Okay, if this is their render image, if not, render null, right? But if you do that, you're losing out on recycling. Like, these could be minute gains, but if you, instead of destroying, you just set, let's say, display none, right? Which just hides it, removes it from layout, but doesn't actually destroy it, then FlashList wouldn't even have to recreate that on the next recycle.
You want everything there, but then just configure it by hiding and yeah, that makes sense. You want basically the identical cells scrolling by that you can just kind of like turn a couple of things on and off.
So it'll take some change in our habits.
Yeah.
Yes. And if you have completely different looking items, right, so you can assign different types to them and let FlashList know, right, that this is of this type, this is of type 2, this is of type 1. And then it can make sure that it chooses the right component to push the new data in. But if you're rendering same type of items, if you make sure that they do not change a lot internally, using these conditionals, it's going to perform a lot better.
Just remember, it's those cows going around the hill. You want to make sure they look different so the rancher doesn't clue in it's the same cow.
So that's one thing. The other thing is, again, recycling, right? A lot of people, when we open sourced it, we saw a lot of people in the Discord community complaining about how their items were not actually updating. So the problem was they were using use state inside their components, making a copy of the data and then updating, right? And when FlashList was recycling them, they were not doing a set state or updating that internal state. So items were not changing. So that is also something that we had to work on educating everyone. Like a lot of lists do not do that, or most of the people always make sure that components can get updated. But again, that's one of those gotchas that you need to know about and you can miss when you're migrating. So that's all about how recycling is a little bit harder compared to just destroying and recreating, right? The other thing, in terms of missing features, actually, we are very, very close to FlatList, except bidirectional infinite scrolling. That's something that we have really not been able to get to. I would say, like, we had a prototype working where, you can have a chat application and you can add items to the bottom or to the top without shifting elements.
Mm-hmm.
But it's something that we want to make sure works well before we push it out. The prototype works well on iOS, but on Android, we still have some issues where you can see certain glitches. So we want to fix that. So if that's important to you, then you should probably still use FlatList. But let's say if you are happy with an inverted experience on FlatList and you use your chat application that way, you can do with FlashList as well. So I think that flag is called maintain visible content position. Like if you heavily depend on that and that's core part of your experience, then FlashList cannot do that right now. But everything else, yeah, it can do pretty well. One more thing that's coming to my mind very quickly is when you do make a mistake on FlashList, and a severe one, right? Like let's say adding a key on your primary component, you will notice performance issues a lot sooner because of how small our render buffer is, which I talked about in the beginning. So that's also something that people have to really think about. But yeah, other than recycling, I wouldn't call anything a major drawback or really sucks about FlashList. If you can change your mindset and adopt recycling, then I think it's pretty easy to use and you can get very close to native list performance. Like they will be practically indistinguishable.
So we have many more questions that we did not get to, but we are out of time here. One of the cool things also is that this is already being integrated into Expo. So it's something that you can use in Expo, I think 46 or maybe even 45. I don't remember exactly which SDK. So that's awesome. Talha, where can people find you online to kind of follow along and learn about the latest and greatest FlashList improvements?
Yeah, you can follow me on Naqvi Talha on Twitter.
Okay, that's NAQVITALHA on Twitter.
Yes.
You can also follow us here at React Native Radio at React Native RDIO. You can follow Robin at Robin_Heinz, Mazen at Mazen Chami, and I'm at Jamin Holmgren. If you want to nerd out more about React Native, check out my Twitch stream at rn.live. I've been not streaming as much this summer, but I'll be doing more as we head into fall and winter, of course.
Too much time in the pool.
That's actually true. Yeah. Trying to patch those patches. You can also join our Slack community at community.infinite.red. We have over 2,000 React Native developers in there. And we do have a new Twitter community, rntwitter.infinite.red. Thanks so much, Talha. This is fantastic. And also thanks to you and to the team there and Shopify itself for open sourcing this solution and letting the rest of us use it. It's really, really cool. A great addition.
Yeah, it's been fun. And thank you all for having me here. It was a pleasure talking to you all and talking about FlashList.
Likewise. Yeah. As always, thanks to our producer and editor, Todd Worth, our assistant editor and episode release coordinator, Jed Bartoski, our designer, Justin Husky, and our guest coordinator, Derek Greenberg. Thanks to our sponsor, Infinite Red. Check us out at infinite.red/React Native. And of course, thank you to the listener. Make sure you subscribe if you're not already. Hey, give us a little like review in the App Store. We don't ask for this hardly ever, but we appreciate it. We have far too few reviews in the App Store and Google Play Store and Spotify compared to how many people we know are listening. There are a ton of you out there, thousands and thousands that are listening right now. So, Robin, do you have a mom joke, by the way, to finish this off?
I do. Why did the electrician fall in love with every girl he ever met? Because he couldn't resist her.
Oh, man. Nerdy joke. You know what? You know our audience. Our audience.
Yep.
That's pretty funny. I guess that's it. We'll see you all next time.
Bye.